The first time my father ever called me selfish was the same night he asked me to sign away my future for my sister. He stood in my apartment kitchen holding a manila folder thick enough to change someone's life. And the strange part wasn't the papers. It was how calm he looked while asking me to trust him. "It's just temporary," he said, loosening his tie like he was exhausted from carrying the whole family on his back. "Sophia only needs help getting through this rough patch." My mother sat silently at my dining table, tracing the rim of a coffee mug with nervous fingers, while my younger sister scrolled through Instagram beside her, barely looking up. If you've ever been the child your family only notices when they need something, then you probably already know how this story ends. Or at least you think you do. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 32 years old. And until 6 months ago, I genuinely believed blood mattered more than contracts. I was wrong. Outside my apartment window, downtown Chicago was glowing under freezing January rain. Headlights stretching across wet streets like melted gold. I had just gotten home from a 12-hour shift at a corporate law firm where I spent most of my day reviewing acquisition agreements worth more money than my parents would see in 3 lifetimes. Ironically, contracts were my specialty. Hidden language, liability clauses, ownership traps buried beneath friendly wording. I built my career finding the things people hoped nobody would read carefully. Maybe that's why what happened next still feels unbelievable. Sophia has an incredible opportunity, my mother finally said softly, like she'd rehearsed the sentence in the car ride over. This company could change her life. I almost laughed at that because everything in our family was always about changing Sophia's life. Growing up, Sophia got horseback riding lessons while I worked weekends at a grocery store. Sophia got a brand new Jeep at 16, while Dad told me scholarships built character. Sophia dropped out of 2 colleges and somehow still became the family's biggest dream. Meanwhile, I became the dependable daughter, the safe daughter, the daughter they only called when something needed fixing. "So what exactly am I signing?" I asked. My father slid the folder toward me a little too quickly. "Just standard Guarantor paperwork," he said. "Nothing complicated." But the second my eyes hit the first page, something cold moved through my stomach. Because buried halfway down the contract was a number that made my pulse stop for a second. $2.8 million. And suddenly, I realized this wasn't temporary at all. I kept my expression neutral while my father talked, but inside, something had already shifted. People think betrayal feels explosive when it happens, like shattered glass or raised voices. It does not. Real betrayal is quieter than that. It sounds like your own heartbeat slowing down while someone who claims to love you calmly explains why your sacrifice is reasonable. It is only until the expansion closes, Dad said, tapping the edge of the paperwork impatiently. After that, the investors release the capital and your name comes off everything. Investors, expansion, temporary guarantor. The words were polished, rehearsed, designed to sound harmless. But the numbers buried inside those pages told a completely different story. $2.8 million tied to a startup that, according to the attached financial summaries, had barely survived the last 6 months. Negative cash flow, missed payments, outstanding vendor debt. Someone had dressed a sinking ship in designer clothes and called it a yacht. I looked over at Sophia. She still would not meet my eyes. Instead, she tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear and said, Almost casually, "You are overthinking this, Evelyn. That is kind of your thing." I almost smiled at that, because overthinking was the reason I survived this family in the first place. It was how I learned that every compliment from my mother came attached to a favor, how every holiday dinner somehow ended with me apologizing for things I never did. How my father only used my full name when he wanted obedience instead of conversation. "I want a copy of everything," I said quietly. Dad exhaled sharply through his nose. "Why would you need that?" "Because I do not sign legal documents without reviewing them." "Jesus Christ," Sophia muttered under her breath. "You act like we are trying to scam you." The room went still after she said it. Not because of the accusation, but because of how quickly it slipped out. My mother immediately jumped in with that wounded tone she used whenever reality got too close to the surface. "Nobody is scamming anybody. We are family." Family. That word, again, as if repeating it enough times could turn manipulation into love. I stood and carried the folder into my kitchen while rain hammered softly against the windows. For nearly 20 minutes, nobody spoke behind me. I read every line slowly, methodically, hearing my father's watch ticking louder each second. Then I found something strange. Buried near the back of the agreement was a clause referencing an amended operating structure that was missing from the packet entirely. My pulse slowed. "Where is Exhibit C?" I asked without turning around. Silence. Actual silence this time. When I looked back, my father and mother exchanged a glance so quick most people would have missed it. But I did not miss anything anymore. And that was the exact moment I realized they had hidden part of the contract from me. I watched my father carefully after I asked about Exhibit C, and for the first time that night, the confidence slipped out of his face. It only lasted a second, maybe less, but I saw it. A flicker. Tiny cracks in the performance. My mother reached for her coffee too quickly and nearly knocked it over. Sophia finally looked up from her phone, her expression tightening like someone who had just realized the conversation was drifting off script. "It is not important," Dad said flatly. "Then why remove it from the packet?" I asked. Nobody answered immediately. Rain tapped softly against the windows while downtown traffic hummed 20 floors below us. The silence between family members can tell you more than words ever will. Growing up, I learned how to survive by studying pauses. My father's pauses usually meant anger. My mother's meant guilt. Sophia's meant she already knew something everyone else was trying to hide. The investors revised a few terms, Mom said finally, forcing a smile that looked painful around the edges. "Your father probably forgot to include the updated pages." Forgot. My father forgot nothing. This was the same man who still remembered the exact amount I owed him for my first used car 15 years ago. He remembered every mistake anyone else had ever made. Stored them like receipts in a drawer he never closed. "Send me the full agreement," I said calmly. "I will review everything with my own attorney." Sophia suddenly laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Wow, you really think everyone is out to get you?" I turned toward her slowly. "No," I said. "I think desperate people make dangerous decisions." Her face changed instantly after that. Something sharp flashed behind her eyes before she looked away. My father stood so abruptly, his chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "This family has done everything for you. he snapped. And this is how you respond when your sister needs support. The words hit me strangely because they were so detached from reality that for a moment I almost questioned my own memory. That was the problem with families like mine. They rewrote history so often that eventually you started wondering if your childhood belonged to someone else entirely. I remembered paying my own rent at 19, while Sophia spent spring break in Cabo. I remembered graduating law school without either parent attending, because Sophia had a dance competition the same weekend. I remembered every birthday phone call that somehow turned into a conversation about her dreams instead of mine. Support had always flowed in one direction. I am not saying no, I told him quietly. I am saying I need transparency before I attach my name to this. My father stared at me for several long seconds. Then, very slowly, something cold settled into his expression. Not anger. Something worse. Calculation. He reached into the folder, pulled out a single loose page, and slid it across the table toward me. Fine, he said. You want transparency. I looked down at the document. The amended operating agreement was dated 3 weeks earlier and already signed with my name. I could hear my own breathing as I stared at the signature on the bottom of the page. Evelyn Carter. My name, perfectly replicated in blue ink. Not close enough to fool a stranger. Close enough to fool a bank. The kind of signature someone creates after years of watching you sign birthday cards, school forms, and holiday checks at the kitchen table. My mother looked away before I even lifted my eyes from the document. That told me more than the signature itself. You forged this, I said quietly. Nobody denied it. That was the part I remember most. Not outrage. Not panic. Just silence hanging over the apartment like smoke after a fire alarm. Sophia finally stood up and crossed her arms. Can you stop making everything sound so dramatic? She snapped. Dad only signed because the investors were threatening to walk away. I looked at her in disbelief. You committed fraud. Lower your voice. My father warned immediately, his tone sharp enough to cut through the room. Nobody committed anything. We are protecting this family. There it was again. Family. That word had become their favorite disguise for control. I thought about all the contracts I had reviewed over the years, all the executives who buried liability behind emotional language. Trust. Loyalty, partnership. People always used soft words when they wanted someone else to carry the risk. Do you even understand what this could do to me? I asked. My father scoffed. Nothing is going to happen. You do not know that. I know your sister is finally building something important. I laughed then. Quietly at first, because suddenly the whole thing felt unreal. My credit, my career, my law license. Everything I spent my entire adult life building had become collateral for Sophia's latest dream. And somehow they still expected gratitude from me. My mother's eyes filled with tears. She always cried when accountability entered the room. Your father was trying to help her, she whispered. The bank would not approve the restructuring without stronger financial backing. So you used mine without asking. We were going to tell you eventually. That sentence landed harder than the forgery itself. Eventually, like consent was just a scheduling issue. I walked toward the windows, pressing my fingers against the cold glass while the city blurred beneath the rain outside. Somewhere below, Car horns echoed through the streets, and a siren passed in the distance. Chicago kept moving, while my entire understanding of my family quietly cracked apart behind me. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something in my stomach tightened before I answered. Ms. Carter. A man's voice said, "This is Daniel Hayes from Blackwell Capital. I apologize for contacting you directly, but there are several urgent discrepancies involving your sister's company and your personal guarantee." My father's face changed the second he heard the name. Completely changed. Fear, real fear. And before I could respond, Daniel said something that made the entire room go still. "There is one more thing you should know. You are not listed as the guarantor anymore." For a moment, nobody in the apartment moved. My father stared at my phone like he already knew exactly who Daniel Hayes was, and why hearing his name out loud could destroy everything. I stepped farther away from my family, instinctively, pressing the phone tighter against my ear. "What do you mean I am not the guarantor anymore?" I asked carefully. Across the room, Sophia's face had lost all color. Daniel hesitated for half a second before speaking again. "There were amendments filed 48 hours ago transferring financial liability and operational control under a revised structure. We assumed you approved the changes, personally." My stomach tightened. Revised structure. The missing Exhibit C. Suddenly, every strange pause that night started fitting together like pieces of broken glass sliding into place. "I did not approve anything," I said. "Then we have a serious problem," Daniel replied quietly. "Because according to the filed documents, your electronic authorization was verified." My father started walking toward me immediately. "Hang up the phone," he said under his breath. Not angry this time. Panicked. Actual panic. It was the first honest emotion I had seen from him all night. I ignored him. "Mr. Hayes," I said, forcing my voice steady, "who replaced me as guarantor." Silence stretched across the line for a beat too long. Then Daniel answered carefully, like someone stepping through a minefield in the dark. "Technically, no one replaced you. The structure changed ownership percentages instead." My mother suddenly stood up so fast, her chair nearly tipped backward. "Richard," she whispered sharply. And whatever passed between them in that moment made my pulse start pounding harder. Because this was bigger than fraud now. Bigger than forged signatures. Something else had happened after those papers were filed. Something they never expected me to find out this quickly. "Send me every document connected to this company," I said into the phone. "Tonight." "I already did," Daniel replied. "Check your email." The second the call ended, my father reached for my phone, but I stepped back before he could touch it. "Evelyn, listen to me carefully," he said, lowering his voice the way people do when they are seconds away from losing control. "You do not understand how complicated this situation is. Then explain it." "Not here." Sophia suddenly exploded. "Because she will ruin everything," she shouted, tears filling her eyes. "You always do this. You always have to act smarter than everyone else." I stared at her in disbelief. "I am trying to understand why my identity was used to manipulate a multi-million-dollar deal." "Because we had no choice," she cried. The room fell silent after that. Even she looked shocked. She had said it out loud. My email notification appeared a second later. Blackwell Capital. 12 attached files. I opened the first document while my family watched me in complete silence. Then I saw the amended ownership structure. My hands went cold instantly. My sister no longer owned the majority of the company. My father did. The air inside my apartment felt suddenly too small, too warm, like the walls themselves were closing in around us. I kept staring at the ownership breakdown on my phone while my father avoided looking directly at me. 51% controlling interest transferred to Richard Carter through an emergency restructuring agreement filed less than 2 days earlier. Sophia, the girl this entire scheme was supposedly built to protect, now owned less than 20% of her own company. Everything else had been divided between outside investors and my father. Not my mother, not Sophia. Him. You used her, I said quietly. Looking at Sophia, her mascara had started smudging beneath her eyes, but she still looked more angry than hurt. Do not act like you suddenly care about me, she snapped. You always thought you were better than us. This is not about better. Yes, it is. Her voice cracked hard enough to echo off the kitchen cabinets. You left. You escaped. You got the career, the apartment, the perfect life downtown, while the rest of us stayed here trying to survive. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out because buried underneath her anger was something I had never heard from Sophia before. Resentment. Real resentment. Not toward our parents, toward me. My father stepped forward before either of us could speak again. Sophia does not understand the financial side of this, he said sharply. I had to step in before the company collapsed. So you forged my signature to secure control, I replied. I protected this family. He shot back instantly. You protected yourself? The silence after that felt dangerous. My mother started crying softly near the table, twisting a paper napkin between trembling fingers. She always did that when the truth got too close to the surface. Like tears could somehow blur reality before anyone had to fully look at it. You do not understand what was happening, she whispered. The investors were threatening lawsuits. The payroll account was empty. Your father was trying to save Sophia from humiliation? By taking her company? I asked. Mom looked down immediately. That answer alone told me everything. Sophia finally noticed it too. I watched confusion slowly replace the anger on her face as pieces started connecting in real time. Dad, she said carefully. What does she mean by control? My father did not answer right away. He walked toward the windows instead, staring out over the rain-soaked city below us. His reflection in the glass looked older somehow, heavier. Cornered people either collapse or become dangerous. I had spent years watching executives choose between those two options in conference rooms, just like this. The investors required stronger leadership, he said finally without turning around. Temporary leadership. Sophia's breathing changed instantly. What did you promise them? She asked. He still would not face us. Dad, her voice shook now. What did you sign? Another silence? Longer this time. Heavy enough that even the rain outside seemed quieter. Then my phone buzzed again with a new email from Daniel Hayes. Subject line: Immediate action required. Attached was a scanned document labeled Emergency Asset Transfer Authorization, signed by Richard Carter. And directly beneath his signature was something that made my blood run cold. A scheduled transfer date. Tomorrow morning. Everything after that started happening too fast. Sophia grabbed my phone before I could stop her and stared at the document with widening eyes. Asset transfer, she whispered. Dad, what assets? My father finally turned away from the window. But whatever explanation he had prepared collapsed the second he looked at her face. She was not angry anymore. She was terrified. Sophia, listen to me carefully, he said, stepping toward her slowly, like she might break apart if he moved too fast. This was the only way to stabilize the company. You said the investors just wanted temporary guarantees. They did. Then why are they taking my shares tomorrow morning? My mother started crying harder. Not quiet tears anymore. Real panic. The kind that comes when a lie grows too large to control. I took the phone back and kept scrolling through the files Daniel sent. Every page made the situation worse. Hidden debt. Emergency liquidity agreements. Default triggers tied to payroll deadlines. My father had not just restructured Sophia's company. He had been preparing to surrender it piece by piece to investors while using my identity as leverage to keep the collapse hidden long enough to protect himself. Oh, may God, I whispered, before I could stop myself. You were never trying to save her. Nobody spoke. Sophia looked at him like she had never actually seen him before. Dad? She asked quietly. He rubbed both hands over his face. Exhausted now, older than I had ever seen him. You do not understand the pressure I was under? Did you steal my company? She asked again, louder this time. I built that business. You built an image. He snapped suddenly. I built the parts keeping it alive. The room exploded after that. Sophia started screaming through tears while my mother begged both of us to calm down. Her voice, shaking so badly, half the words barely made sense. I stood frozen near the kitchen island, watching 20 years of family mythology collapse in real time. The successful daughter, the selfless father, the supportive mother, none of it had ever been real. It was all survival wrapped in nicer language. You used me? Sophia cried. You used both of us. Dad slammed his hand against the counter hard enough to rattle the coffee cups. I was trying to stop this family from losing everything. No, I said quietly, cutting through the chaos. You were trying to stop yourself from losing control. Silence hit the room instantly. My father looked at me with something close to hatred now because we both knew I was right. Then Sophia suddenly wiped her face and turned toward me. Can you stop the transfer? She asked. The desperation in her voice hit harder than all the screaming. For the first time in my life, my sister was looking at me like I was the person with power. I looked back down at the documents, my legal instincts moving faster than my emotions. Now, there was one possible way to block the transfer, one clause buried deep inside the restructuring agreement, the same missing clause they tried to hide from me. And the second I fully understood what it meant, my heart nearly stopped, because if I used it, everything would legally transfer to me instead. I did not speak for a long time after that realization settled in. The city lights outside my apartment blurred softly against the rain, while everyone waited for me to decide what happened next. Funny how power changes the temperature in a room. 10 minutes earlier, my father had been issuing commands like nothing could touch him. Now, nobody moved without watching my face first. Sophia sat at the edge of the couch with both hands covering her mouth, staring at the floor like the ground beneath her had disappeared. My mother looked smaller, somehow, curled inward with swollen eyes and trembling fingers, as if years of pretending everything was fine had finally exhausted her completely. And my father, he looked tired, not defeated yet. Just tired, in the way people look when the version of themselves they spent decades protecting starts collapsing in public. If I activate the clause, I said carefully, the transfer stops immediately. Nobody interrupted. But control moves to me under the emergency protection structure. Sophia slowly lowered her hands. For how long? Potentially, permanently. The silence after that felt different from the others. Softer. Sadder. Like everyone in the room finally understood, there were no good outcomes left, only less painful ones. My father rubbed his jaw and stared down at the hardwood floor. "You would really take your sister's company?" he asked quietly. I almost laughed at the irony. Take, as if ownership had ever mattered more to him than control itself. "You already did that," I replied. "I would be stopping strangers from finishing it." He looked up at me then, and for the first time all night, there was no manipulation in his expression, just age, regret, maybe, or the realization that somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing his daughters as people and started seeing them as solutions to financial problems. Sophia suddenly stood and walked toward the kitchen window, wrapping her arms around herself tightly. "I knew things were bad," she whispered. "But I did not know you were using her." My father opened his mouth, but she shook her head before he could speak. "No, just stop." Her voice cracked softly. "Please stop talking, like this was for me." That hurt him more than any accusation I could have made. I could see it immediately. My mother started crying again. Quieter this time. The kind of crying people do when they realize the family they spent years trying to preserve no longer exists in the same form. I remembered childhood dinners suddenly. My father carving turkey at Thanksgiving while Sophia talked excitedly about future dreams, and my mother asked me to refill everyone's drinks before I had even finished eating. Little moments, tiny, invisible things. Families do not break all at once. They crack slowly for years before anyone hears the sound. I looked back down at the transfer clause glowing on my phone screen. One signature from me could stop the investors by morning. One decision could legally place everything under my control instead. And somewhere beneath all the anger, exhaustion, and betrayal, I realized the hardest part was not deciding whether I could do it. It was realizing nobody in my family actually believed I would. By 3 in the morning, the rain had finally stopped. The city outside my apartment looked washed clean, glowing silver beneath the streetlights. While inside, the four of us sat in the quiet aftermath of everything we had finally said out loud. Nobody had the energy left to argue anymore. Sophia had fallen asleep, curled into the corner of the couch sometime after midnight. Mascara dried faintly beneath her eyes, looking younger than I had seen her in years. Not the confident girl from social media. Not the golden child. My parents spent decades protecting just my little sister, exhausted and scared. My mother sat beside her silently, one hand resting against Sophia's shoulder like she was trying to hold together something already broken. My father remained near the windows the entire time. He barely moved, Every now and then he would loosen his tie or rub his forehead, but otherwise he just stared out at the skyline like he was searching for a version of his life that still made sense. Around 3:17 a.m. I signed the clause. The transfer to the investors was frozen before the markets opened that morning. Emergency control shifted to me exactly as the contract allowed. Legally, the company became mine overnight. Nobody celebrated. That was the strange part. After all the lies, manipulation, panic, and fighting, there was no victory hiding underneath it. Just consequences. My father finally looked at me after I finished the paperwork. "You always were the careful one," he said quietly. Not angry anymore. Just defeated. I thought hearing those words would feel satisfying after everything, but they did not. They felt heavy, like finding out too late that the thing you spent your whole life chasing was never really love. Only usefulness. "I learned from you," I answered softly. He nodded once after that, almost like he understood something about himself for the first time. A week later, I moved Sophia into a smaller apartment across town, while the legal teams untangled the company finances. We barely talked during the drive. At one point, she stared out the passenger window and asked, "Did you hate me growing up?" The question caught me off guard because the truth was complicated. "No," I said after a long pause. "I think I hated feeling invisible next to you." She looked down at her hands after that and whispered, "I did not know." I believed her. That was the tragedy of families sometimes. The people standing closest to the damage are often the last ones to truly see it. My parents stayed together, though something quieter settled between all of us after that night. Less pretending. Fewer performances. Holidays became smaller. Conversations became more careful. Honest. Even when honesty hurt. Sometimes I still think about that moment at my kitchen table when my father first slid those papers toward me, convinced I would sign without reading because that was the role our family had written for me long ago. The dependable daughter, the easy sacrifice. But people change when they finally realize their silence has been costing them pieces of themselves for years. And maybe that is why stories like this stay with us. Because somewhere out there, someone listening probably knows exactly what it feels like to be loved only when they are needed.